Alright, so now that we have our spec maps painted, we have our base color maps painted, let's talk about displacement now. And I have these original images that I brought up earlier, just a few of them. And so let's talk about displacement on the skin. From a traditional standpoint, in terms of how at least I used to paint pore displacement for skin, they're essentially just derived from my color maps. And as you can see, there's an inherent problem with that because color doesn't always dictate the actual surface quality. So you get these blemishes on the face, these freckles, that when converted to displacement maps would divot in and produce an incorrect result. You can obviously go in and clone stamp all this stuff, but that's time consuming and it just ends up muddling the overall look and making things too even and perfect, and it's slightly off the mark, and you don't get a really good result. So it's a technique. This technique that I'm going to show you guys is kind of something that Weta Digital started doing on Avatar, and it was the idea of extracting the actual physical surface from a face, a hand, anything on the skin by way of plaster casts and silicone molds. So they would take a cast of someone's face and then from that cast they would pour a very, very thin layer of silicone on top of it, let it set, chop it up, peel it off, and scan those silicone molds on a flatbed scanner. That way you don't get any interruption from the color information, and it's strictly what is happening in the displacement surface of the skin. So this is the technique that I'm going to show you guys now, because I think what happens when you try to take your color maps and just desaturate them and turn them into displacement maps is you start getting this very strange photo look, that it looks like you just took a photo and stamped it onto the model, and there's not that level of complexity that you get from real skin, because a lot of these pore details that you're seeing and these wrinkles are in fact not really in the color maps. They may be very slightly, but a lot of these details are reserved strictly for the displacement and the specular maps. So in the pores you lose some specularity, and on the surface you get these wrinkles. So not putting them in your color maps will actually give you a much more interesting and complicated look when you move around the model and you see that there's a bunch of different pore details. And that brings me into my next point, is that the face is comprised of so many different types of pores, and you don't get that from color maps, especially if you're taking polarized images, cross-polarized images. You'll definitely not get any of that information. So the ideal scenario is to take cross-polarized images that have no displacement detail in them, have no specular detail in them, paint those independent from your displacement maps, and then from there you can derive your spec maps. However, as you've seen, I've done my spec maps before my displacement, and I'll kind of go into reasons why I did that first, but you can always reverse engineer things. If, for instance, you painted your spec maps first and then you have some displacement detail that you want to add into your spec maps, that's easy to do. However, I'll give you the reasons why I didn't end up doing that for this particular asset. But for right now, let's dive into actually my process of painting the pore level detail and getting all the different kind of variations of pores on the face, because you get some really nice, interesting pores on the chin versus pores on between the brows and on the cheeks. So let's jump into Mari. You guys may have noticed that I'm using Mari 1.2 V1B2, so I'm in a beta right now, and I just received this a few days ago. So it's a little bit different. There's some new icons that you'll notice up over here, and there's new functionality. I apologize that I've had to kind of increment the Mari versions, but based on my time frame, it just was something that I had to do. So again, I haven't fully tested the beta, so I'm just going to go through what I usually do to paint the displacements, and when I get into painting more of the maps later in this DVD, we'll be implementing some of the new features in the beta version. So here's the model as we know, and what I've done is I've imported these maps. Now these maps have been supplied by Paul Callender over at surfacemimic.com, and he is essentially providing the exact same type of maps that Weta Digital fabricates in-house, which is a fantastic resource. And let's open up one of these and take a look. So this is a female forehead that he's actually done a mold, extracted a silicone layer, and then scanned. And as you can see, there is some amazing detail in here. One-to-one pore detail, and you can really get a sense of the Langer lines in the face. And these are the kind of the flow wrinkles that you get on a face. And this is the kind of stuff that, one, you don't get in photographs, and two, to get this kind of complexity and variation is almost near to impossible from traditional methods. So this new technique is extremely powerful in many, many different ways. Firstly, obviously, you're getting very varied kind of detail from just a small patch of the forehead. You're getting a lot of variation in the blemishes and the bumps, the wrinkles versus the pores. It's just a very nice map. And so if we open up the cheek, you can see the same stuff. Incredible detail and variation. So these are going to be this is going to be the starting point for our maps. And from here, it's a very simple approach. We're doing just like we've always done. We're just going to project these maps onto the face. So let's do that right now. And it's the same technique as before. I'm going to go to my layers and name this, let's see. And then with the painter tool, I'm just going to grab this cheek. Move it into place. And grab a stormy brush. So as you can see, this doesn't really line up based on how the piece of silicone was flattened and scanned, but that's okay because we're kind of fudge stuff. So I'm going to start with something simple like this wrinkle. Right here. Just paint this down. And this is actually lining up pretty nicely with the eye. So I'm going to bake that. So you can see we're getting some amazing pore level details on this face. Stuff that we just couldn't get from our color maps. So from here I'm going to just keep on projecting this image. So this process is really no different than what we've been doing. Same technique. Break that down. So very quickly we're getting some really nice coverage on this face. And the lines on these lips are going to read really well over that edge. It's going to be really nice and clean. So now for the eye. So this scan, it's a little more wrinkled than I'd like. So I'm going to kind of just cheat this and just get that top edge, the bottom edge here. Like so. I'm actually going to grab these eyes and lock them. Getting these really nice, fine, pore history wrinkles in the face here. This is some of the tougher stuff to get. It's going to just read really, really nicely. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now let's move on to the nose. So he's got a scan of the nose, like so. Some really nice details again. Now everybody's nose is very different, so I'm just basing this off of the scans. But be sure to check the pores on the nose, because a lot of people have a lot of blackheads on their nose and these really dark, kind of pimply pores right on the ball of the nose. So just check your reference and just make a call. And it really depends on the type of face, obviously, you're doing, and what you're trying to get out of it. So for her, I don't want her necessarily to look like she has, bad skin. In fact, I want the opposite. So just going to leave it pretty clean. And when you're painting in some of these details, don't be afraid to kind of blend. So I'm using part of this cheek detail here just to creep up into the face here, and technically it's not really the right location, but I'm just trying to get really nice clean coverage on this face. So sometimes cheating like that can be very useful. So let's go back to the nose and get that bridge right there. It's going to be a really nice detail. Just move that down a bit. So I don't want to go too far. In fact, I would pretty much consider this a front projection. It's more kind of imperative, in my opinion, to do these breakups. Like in the color maps, I broke it up into a lot of different projection layers. And it was more imperative because when I was grading my color maps, there was obviously a discrepancy between the left and the right image. The left image of the face was a bit darker, just the exposure and how they shot it. So that was mainly the reason why I did that, so it was easier to blend it back all together. However, with these displacement maps, I know that they're all perfectly uniform, and they're all revolving around 50% gray. So I don't really need to go with these layers. You can do it just to be safe, and so you can blend things later, but now that I've been painting this, it really doesn't matter for displacements, at least for these displacements. I can really just rename this and call this base disp, and then just continue projecting over the face, so I don't have to build up more layers that I inevitably am just going to merge back down. So again, it's just a workflow thing. Depends on what you want to do and how you want to do it. But for the purposes of this demo and what I'm trying to do, it really doesn't matter that they're all in the same layer. So I'm just going to continue with the painting. I take a speckly brush here. I want to get a bit of a transition. Fade some of this back, like so. Cool. So I'm pretty happy with this so far. And as you can see, you're getting tons of variation from the pores above the lips to the pores right underneath the eyes to the pores on the cheeks. You're getting some really nice kind of pock marks in the face that aren't going to be in the color map. So you're not going to get that kind of doubling up, that kind of weird photographic doubling up that you would get if these were in the photographs and you were just converted to displacement maps. So it's going to give really nice kind of intricate, complicated look for the surface of the skin. So you kind of get the point of this. I'm going to quickly jump ahead and show you guys what the displacement maps look like when they're done. So I'm going to pause this and import a displacement map for you that I've already finished. Alright, so I'm back. So I've imported the completed displacement maps for the face that I've painted. As you can see, it's a process that I did before, just projecting all over the face. For the ear area, I just literally took part of the cheek and painted right into there. So it's pretty basic. And I think one thing I want to note is that one thing people neglect is getting proper bump detail on the crest of this cartilage. A lot of people leave it way too smooth, and especially inside the ear, they leave it way too smooth. So I encourage you guys to paint some really nice pore detail on these, because it's going to read really nicely on the glancing angles and stuff. So I'm pretty happy with this. However, as you can see, it's not done, because unfortunately I don't have any scans for the neck. And although this, I mean, honestly, it's not an important part for this demo. If it were a hero character that had a full body, I would probably spend a little bit more time on the neck. However, what we're really concentrating on is getting this pore detail on the face. And so I'm just going to show you guys right now how I ended up filling in the neck. You know, in production, you're going to get a lot of obstacles. Most of the time, it's going to be not enough texture reference, not enough photo reference, not enough material to work with. So you got to kind of make do with what you've got. So what I ended up doing is I'm going to grab my color map that I originally painted, like so, and I'm going to actually convert this like I did before in a traditional sense. I'm going to convert all this neck texture to displacement detail. Again, I'm not too worried about the neck, and I want her neck to be pretty smooth anyway, so it's going to actually work out pretty well. And also, I want to get displacement detail for the eyebrows and this mole that obviously is not in this displacement. So the first thing we do is we're going to just grab an adjustment stack within this layer, and I'm just going to desaturate it with illuminance, like so. And then I'm going to go back into this adjustment stack and add levels. Just going to bring this down a bit. And from here, I'm going to mask this completely out. And then from a side angle, I'm going to take a organic brush, make sure I have paint through, and I'm going to make sure I've got white selected, and I'm just going to paint right through to bring back this neck. Like so. Obviously it's not perfect, it's going a little dark. So I'm going to go back into the levels and bring this up a bit to match it. And then just to blend it a bit better, I'm going to grab a softer brush actually. And then in the mask, I'm just going to blend this a bit better. We don't want under this chin to be that bumpy anyway, so it actually works out pretty well. Like so. And then a little bit up the back of the head. Although we're not going to see the back of the head, so it's not a huge deal, but I want to just cover all your bases just in case. There. So because I did an okay job with the displacement on my neck, it's actually going to work pretty well in getting some of these finer wrinkles around the neck, some of these kind of chicken skin type stuff that you see typically on people's neck. So I'm pretty happy with this. So that's how I've actually ended up filling in the rest of the head, and it was pretty quick, and it gets me what I want. I'm also going to go in here and reveal the mole, like so. I just want the mole, a little bit of detail around it. Obviously this is not the right color because it's actually going to divot in. So from here, I'm going to grab another levels and crank this up. Like so. And then mask this one. And then with a soft brush, I'll paint into here, like so. So now this is going to displace out a bit more. There. And I kind of want to leave a little bit of this darkening around because it'll actually accent some of this embossing of this mole, which will work really well. So almost done with these displacement maps. The final thing I need to do is put the eyebrows back in. So let's do that. So I'm going to duplicate this layer. So I didn't actually go through painting the eyebrows. I just realized that, but it's actually a pretty simple process. It's exactly what I've done before. I just took the photographs and projected the eyebrows onto the face. So it's very straightforward, and just blended it, and you're done. So let's actually delete, let's start from scratch here. And we're going to delete the stack. So we have the original. So we're going to go back and add a luminance. We're going to go into this adjustment stack and add a invert. So that's almost exactly what we want. And then in the layers for this, we're going to call these eyebrows. We're going to screen it. And then from here, we're going to apply another levels to kind of bring it into place. Like so. And then I'm going to mask this entire layer out and then reveal the eyebrows back in. So we're just getting the eyebrow detail. Like so. And now this is going to be really nice on displacing that texture outwards from the face. And you get really nice fine lines and fine hairs that's going to pick up really nicely. In fact, I'm going to actually duplicate this again so we double it up so we get a little bit more strength to it, and it's just going to read a bit better, because with just this it's going to kind of read a bit flat. So by doubling it up a bit, we're going to get a little bit more bang for our buck on that displacement. And then from here, what I do is I'll actually render this and I'll take a look at it. And what actually happened when I was actually painting this and rendering it is that I found that although all these pore details were really great and it was working really well, it was actually still too even. And this was an artistic decision on my point. I just felt like the displacement on the nose was exactly the same kind of displacement height as the cheeks, and I wanted the nose to be slightly smoother, and I wanted the lips actually to be more displaced, so you get even more variation. So you can't just rely on projecting these images and saying, okay, I'm done. It's that final 3 to 5% of finessing that'll really bring your textures alive. And so what I ended up doing is I ended up grabbing just a levels here, and I ended up leveling this out a bit, like so. And then I took a mask and I hid the levels. And on the nose, with a very soft brush, I started smoothing out some of that displacement. Just on the nose. I still want it to displace, but I just want it to be slightly smoother because it's going to react better with the reflection on the skin. And the nose is slightly smoother than the cheeks. And then, as you probably have seen, I ended up doing that for the ears as well, just on these ridges, because I wanted it to be super displaced inside the ear, so you get those pores. But right on this ridge on both the ears, I kind of just smoothed it out with the exact same technique. But it was actually baked in from the image that the texture that I brought in. But it's the same technique. And then it's the exact opposite for the lips. So I'm going to grab another levels. And I'm going to crank this up like so. Hide it. And then in my Ortho UV tab, I'm just going to reveal this back. Like so. Because I want the lips to displace a bit rougher. It'll pick up the specular nicely, and it'll read much better. and then finish it up here. There you go. And voila. So these are pretty decent displacement maps that I'm going to plug in. So this concludes this chapter for painting displacements. In the next chapter, I'm going to open up a discussion on how we end up using these, and there's a couple different ways we end up using these with regards to maybe folding them back into our color maps for more detail, and then folding them into our spec maps possibly. And I'll go over that in the next section when I talk about adding even more detail to the color maps, some grunge and dirt and stuff like that, as well as folding these maps in.